Welcome to another Telltale Books video. I'm Greg, and this is my second in my series on Homer Eon Flint, doing a deep dive into this early science fiction author. It's actually my third video, second of his stories. His second published story, The King of Conserve Island. We are Telltale Books, bringing you the best in literature, literary topics, and graphic design and bookmaking.
If you want to support us, you can find us on Etsy and Pango, where you can find gently used, rare, and even top quality used books.
And if you like this video, be sure to hit the like button, the subscribe button, and maybe even that bell to be notified when new videos go live.
Thanks for joining us.
King of Conserve Island was published in All Story Weekly magazine, just like the Planeteer, and it is a sequel to the Planeteer. Same characters are carried over in it. And it was published in the October 12th, 1918 issue. The getting a hold of a copy proved to be tricky. I'll go into that in a minute, but I did finally get a hold of a copy in time to read it and do this video. Essentially what happens in the story is it's set a bit into the future from Planeteer, and you have, after Earth was moved into orbit around Jupiter, one group of people decided they didn't like what was going on, and they moved to their own private island and started a kingdom. So at the start of this story, the current king is learning about what the outside world is like from his son that goes and visits. And he doesn't like it because there's no competition and there's nobody in charge, and there's no class structure. And he thinks all those things are important. He hatches a plan to try to bring the rest of the world back under the rule of a king. So very quickly, the Planeteer was great mainly because it's historically important and it has a lot of imagination to it. It was really cool, and it wasn't political. This story changes everything. It still has a fair amount of action, and it's just as info dumpy as the Planeteer was, but now what you have is a focus on what is apparently Flint's thesis of why socialism would be better. It's a very political story. It's very focused on that. You have a king who is a very stereotype, cartoon character, harumphing around and saying how there should be a king in charge of everything. The quick summation of whether or not this is a good story. The Planeteer, I thought, was a great story, mainly not because it was so well written, but because it was very imaginative, and it's, at this point, I think it's the first space opera. The first that really goes for that kind of, gosh, wow, pull all the science, all the imaginary science you can possibly think of. This story, much less that, much more focused on a political message. And that is its weakness. That is its downfall, because now you just have a preachy, infodumpy, poorly written pulp adventure. Same characters, but just not a good story. I can't recommend this one. That's the short of it. To get deeper into it, this is taking place in the 23rd century AD, or 4th century New Era. Yeah. The Earth, under control of Babcock, has settled into an orbit and people have settled into life orbiting Jupiter, and they established what is essentially a communist socialist society, but not communism like we know, like Stalin or Mao kind of stuff. More of the ideal of what socialists talked about. But there is one island that is populated by people that when the Earth was moved, they decided they didn't like what was going on, so they moved to this island and isolated themselves and stayed by themselves. And they have a kingdom with a king in charge. And the king's son goes out and gets in touch with the rest of society on Earth and learns about this whole society, and he's impressed. He goes back and tells his father, and his father doesn't like anything of it, doesn't like hearing of it, and starts plotting to overthrow the rest of the Earth. His son is dead set against him, and of course in love with a woman that he met outside of Conserve Island. But the king hatches a plot and sends out spies to stir up trouble and start a revolution. So a revolution is started. There are what are called pioneers that are on Jupiter. Remember, we needed space to grow crops, and Babcock went to Jupiter and found that there was all this space not being used on Jupiter. We could go there and grow all the crops we wanted. Well, the pioneers are the people who are down on Jupiter growing crops. Never mind that Jupiter's a gas giant. They didn't know that in 1918, I guess. So the king sends people from his group, lords, to meet with the pioneers, sends 50 of them to 50 different places on Jupiter, and they all start stirring things up towards a revolution. And so then the pioneers take their airplanes and their weapons and they head towards Earth and start attacking. And you get into a big battle, air battle, between the Earth socialists and the pioneers from Jupiter, until Babcock comes back and threatens to freeze everybody with his latest invention. Temperature starts dropping on Jupiter and on Earth. He's just going to freeze everybody out unless they start talking sense and working these issues out. So he shows up and saves the day, and everybody goes, oh yeah, he's right, and gets back in line. It's a little better than what I've described, but not a whole lot. The story, there's huge sections of info dumps, especially this one section that just goes on and on about how potatoes are being farmed on, and it just was really dull. It was something I didn't care anything about, and really had nothing to do with what's going on, with the politics, with story, with Jupiter. Nothing to do with any of that. It was really bad. And then the fight, the airplane war sequence, that was pretty good. It was good action, but the characters were very predictable. Cardboard cartoon characters, and of course there was a love interest, and of course the main character is asked to be the general of all the socialist armies. And I mean, it was simple pulp adventure, and still had to kind of remember that this is 1918 and nobody else was writing, at least nobody else was publishing stuff like this. E.E. Smith was writing his Skylark series, but he didn't publish it until like 1927 or 28, 10 years later. Orion Flint wrote and published in 1918 space operas. So even though this is not that great, it's of historical significance because of when this was published. Nobody else had written anything remotely like this before. I wish I could recommend this one too, but it lacked the strengths that the Planeteer had. And so all it had was the weaknesses that the Planeteer had, with a lot of socialist politics, basically propaganda, utopianism thrown in for good measure to totally spoil something that, I mean, it could have been good if it would have been more of the Planeteer, but it wasn't. Didn't even have nearly the level of imagination that the Planeteer had. So, not a top tale, not recommended. This one misses the mark by my judgment, and that's probably why it's so hard to get a hold of it. It was published in All Story Weekly, and nobody else bothered to ever publish this story. The Planeteer was reprinted a number of times, but nobody bothered to publish this story until a fanzine called Pulp Dom published it in 2 parts in issues number 68 and 69, February 2012 and April 2012. This is number 69. No artwork for this, for the King of Conserve Island. There's a painting that shows some kind of like Aztec looking island, but it really isn't Conserve Island. And this was just a fanzine. It was originally Herbdom, and it became Pulp Dom, and they were reprinting lost pulp stories, which is really cool. And there's nice articles in the magazine. In the first of them, of the 2, issue 68, there's a nice article about the story. And so for those of you who are really interested in the history and want to know more about all that stuff, excellent way to get it. The only way that I could get a hold of this story was to get copies of that Pulp Down magazine off the used market, and then I read it. But it hasn't been professionally published since All Story Weekly. And after having read it, I can see why. It really isn't. I was kind of hoping the Planeteer and the King of Conserve Island together would make almost a whole novel that maybe I could look at for a Telltale Books product in the near future. But no, if I might do the Planeteer by itself as more of a chapbook, but I don't see any reason to bring King of Conserve Island back. It's just not that good. Homer on Flint then has got 1 hit and 1 miss so far. So the next is The Lord of Death, his 3rd published story. I'll be reading that very soon and reporting to you on that. Watch for that review in about a week after this one goes up. Week and a half, something like that. And I hope you'll join me for that and all the rest of the Homer on Flint and everything else I do here in Telltale Books. Remember to hit the like button and the subscribe button, and come on back.